Is it possible to be a right-wing atheist? A message to America first, Groypers, Christian Nationalists, Paleoconservatives, Traditional Conservatives, and Christian Fundamentalists. Does America and Western civilization need Christianity? Is the acceptance of homosexuality a slippery slope for pedophilia? Is it possible to be moral without God? Part 1. Atheist countries that traditionalists/conservatives may like. Part 2. Are atheism and homosexuality slippery slopes to pedophilia? Part 3. Purity. Part 4. Videos to listen to and articles to read. Part 5. Resources. Part 1. Right-wing atheist countries. Japan. Japan is famous for having very little immigration. Japan is also a strict law and order society with almost no tolerance for crime. Yakuza are tolerated had to keep other criminals down. Singapore has a secular government but is an insanely socially conservative law and order society. East Asia in general is like this, which Singapore is an exclave of. Czech Republic and Estonia, the two of the world's least religious countries, yet have some of the strictest immigration and restrictions in the first world. They shall issue licenses to own centerfire, semi-automatic rifles, and shotguns, and shall issue licenses to own and even conceal carry handguns, being 2 of the 5 countries in Europe that shall issue licenses to conceal carry firearms. New Hampshire is one of the 2 least religious states in the United States of America, but has permissive weapon laws and low taxes. Honorable mentions, pun intended, of so many Asian countries listed here, since Asian cultures tend to be honor cultures. Mongolia, it's mostly irreligious, but both prostitution and pornography are illegal. Syria, this one is for right-wingers who dislike Israel. Syria is a secular state, not an Islamic fundamentalist state, but is one of the best countries that stand up to Israel because of civic nationalist unity and a respectable public image, in contrast to the likes of Iran and the Houthi rebels, who also oppose Israel but have a toxic public image of their tribal hatred of the United States of America and Western civilization. Syria even has one of the lowest divorce rates in the world, especially before the Syrian war and Wuhan bat lab flu scare. Interestingly, Japan is pretty popular among younger right-wingers, largely due to Japanese cultural exports, such as anime, manga, video games, and so on, but they overlook Japan's irreligion. Some Christian right-wingers I've seen believe that Christianity is a vaccine against or necessary to fight Marxism. I think that the idea that Christianity is needed to fight Marxism simply falls flat on its face. The Eastern Orthodox Church, which failed to stop the Bolsheviks in the Soviet Union, and likewise the Catholic Church has failed to save Eastern Europe from the Soviet Union or socialist Yugoslavia. The whole of Latin America is Catholic, but that didn't stop Cuba from becoming a Marxist-Leninist state, or Venezuela from becoming a Marxian command economy, or Marxism from becoming influential in the rest of Latin America. Not to say that the Catholic Church never did anything good. Most Hispanics/Latinos are Catholic, and the past has mostly voted Republican, but today mostly vote Democrat. Most blacks, most black Americans are the most religious ethnic group in America, with the vast majority being Christian, but most blacks vote Democrat. I've seen members of the Christian right cherry-pick the Soviet Union and mainland China as examples of atheist countries. I can cherry pick too. I can compare Uganda and Zambia to Japan, Singapore, Czech Republic, and Estonia. I'm sure that the vast majority of members of the Christian right would rather live in the latter four countries. Likewise, I can also compare Mississippi to New Hampshire. So, as a Christian right-winger, would you rather live in the secular countries of the Czech Republic, Estonia, Japan, or Singapore, or the Christian countries of Uganda and Zambia? Remember that correlation isn't causation. One can find correlations between U.S. spending on science, space, and technology, and suicides by hanging, strangulation, suffocation, or the number of people who drowned by falling into a pool in films Nicolas Cage appeared in, or per capita cheese consumption and the number of people who died by becoming tangled in their bedsheets. Seriously, those are the first three examples that are on Tyler Vigen's his website, Spurious Correlations. He's also written a book by the same name. Part 2. Are atheism and homosexuality slippery slopes to pedophilia? Plus abortion. Members of the Christian right credit Christianity with ending child marriages and making pedophilia a taboo. This again just falls flat on its face. As that Wikipedia points out, the age of consent laws didn't exist until the 20th century. I've read something about age of seduction laws existing, but I don't know much about them, or if they even existed at all. Really existed at all. Well, the general ages of consent are now set between 16 and 18 in all U.S. states. Age of consent has widely varied across the country in the past. In 1880, the ages of consent were set at 10 or 12 in most states, with the exception of Delaware, where it was at 7. The ages of consent were raised across the U.S. during the late 19th century and early 20th century. By 1920, 26 states had an age of consent at 16, 21 states had an age of consent at 18, and one state, Georgia, had an age of consent at 14. Small adjustments of these laws occurred after 1920. The last two states to raise its age of general consent from under 16 to 16 or higher were Georgia, which raised the age of consent from 14 to 16 in 1995, and Hawaii, which changed it from 14 to 16 in 2001. Child marriage in the United States. In many cases, minors in the U.S. may be married when they are under the age of consent, which varies from 16 to 18. In some states, minors cannot legally divorce, leave their spouse, or enter a shelter to escape abuse. If you're really curious about child marriage in America, the best article to read is Child Marriage, Common in the Past, Persists Today by Andrea Dukakis of Colorado Public Radio. Perhaps the best book about child marriage in America is American Bride, A History of Minors and Marriage in the United States by Nicholas Helsiret. Banning Child Marriage in America, An Uphill Fight Against Evangelical Pressure. The only reason why child marriage is tolerated in America is because the vast majority of people are ignorant about it, because the media doesn't report on it. If the media report hit on child marriage en masse, it would stop. Pedophilia being made a taboo was a positive social development of the 20th century that had little, if anything, to do with Christianity. To channels, Red Shark Intelligence and Soph, neither of which are left-wing, has mentioned this issue. Legal pedophilia in the U.S. A True Story of Child Brides in America by Red Shark Intelligence, and Child Marriage is Legal by Soph. If you think Catholics are the world's most moral people, think again. Look into Catholic Church sexual abuse cases. Even TV tropes list the trope pedophile priest. In Poland, almost 30% of all child rape suspects are priests, as reported by the Renegade Tribune, a very right-wing, socially conservative, and nationalist source. Granted, I don't hate most Catholics. In fact, one of my favorite commentators, Tom Woods, is one. And Poland is one of my favorite countries in the world, believe it or not. But I don't pull punches whenever I criticize countries. For any Christian who still opposes same-sex marriage, here's types of marriage recognized by the Bible. Man plus woman plus concubines, man plus woman and plus woman's property, including slaves, man plus multiple women, polygyny, man plus brother's widow, rapist plus his victim, male soldier plus female prisoner of war, or male slave plus female slave, which is depicted in the Dark Matter 2525 video, Atheist Comedy, Family Values. All this, plus child marriage and marital rape being perfectly legal in Christianity, but something's wrong with two consenting adults who love each other if they happen to be the same sex. Compare all that to gays against groomers. I've seen a Christian right-winger blame atheists for prostitution. Not all atheists believe that prostitution should be legal, and not everyone that thinks prostitution should be legal like it on a personal level. On the issue of prostitution, countries such as Hungary and Poland are even more liberal than San Francisco, California, or Portland, Oregon, two of the most left-wing cities in the United States of America. In France, Canada, and Sweden, and socially the most left-wing countries in the entire world, all of which prostitution is illegal, or at least buying sex is illegal. Prostitution was actually tolerated by the Catholic Church until the 19th and 20th centuries, and the actual traditionalist position would have prostitution to be legal. Prostitution legalization in the left wing by Freedom Alternative. Prostitution, bad news about Christianity. Socialist whores. What did Karl Marx think of prostitution? By Slate. Amnesty International says prostitution is a human right, but it's wrong. By The Guardian. The Last Dance. Why the Canadian strip club is a dying institution. I've seen religious conservatives associate transgenders with atheists. In reality, you don't need to be religious to disagree with transgenderism. Ryan Dawson, an atheist, has made a video called "Is Transgender Sexist?" along with other videos, as did Catholics. Freedom Alternative, Lucian Valsan, Stick Sex and Hammer 666, /Tall Warwick, and Yaron Book, all atheist libertarians, has criticized transgenderism or things related to transgenderism. There's also TERF, or a trans-exclusionary radical feminist. Joe Rogan, an agnostic, has criticized biological men in women's sports, along with Short Fat Otaku and John Stossel. Joe Rogan reflects on Fallon Fox controversy. The animated sitcom South Park, whose writers are not very religious, has created an entire episode on the subject. Go Strong Woman Go. If you want to argue against abortion, I suggest using philosophy like My Two Cents hence did with his video series and playlist, Abortion and Libertarianism. Dave Smith isn't a particularly religious man, and he's made some pretty good arguments hence against abortion, and part of the problem, episode 775, the Texas Taliban. I've heard Christian right-wingers blaming mass shootings on taking God out of schools, but no one talks about the fact that so many school shooters are on SSRIs, medicated to death. SSRIs has in mass killings by the Corbett Report. And the documentary, The Drugging of Our Children. Part 3. Videos to listen to and articles to read. Videos to listen to in exact order. Religious LARPers are ruining the internet, and here's how. Absolutely. The most important here. 2. Should you worry about violent atheists? 3 and 4 respectively. Can Christianity save Western civilization? And which is a condensed version of Christian nationalism is a bad idea. 5. The left won the culture war. Here's why, by Black Pigeon Speaks. 6. 3 reasons the left keeps winning, by Ryan McMacken. 6. Dave Smith's part of the problem, episode 942. Michael Knowles gets it wrong. Skip to 24 minutes in. Articles from right-wing sources. Communism is secular Christianity. The Atheist Conservative. 11 memes. Similarities between Christianity and communism. Was Jesus a proto-communist? History reviewed. Communism is neo-Christianity. National Vanguard. Christianity is communism. Death of communism. Christianity was the communism of antiquity. Communism's Christian roots. The Christian destruction of the classical world. Countercurrents. There's also the website Bad News About Christianity. When it comes to sources of morality, I'd go for some combination of utilitarian / consequentialist and deontological ethics. The video and I'm a Christian and I agree and disagree with Prager and Killian on various subject matters. When it comes to morality, I do think Dennis Prager is stretching quite a bit with this one. Can being a Christian make you a moral person? Yes. There are principles in Christianity that make you a moral person. However, all you have to do is look at humanity as a whole to realize that you don't have to be Christian to be a moral person. If what Dennis said is true, you would see atheists out there murdering and raping. I know people who aren't Christian and nor who grew up with any sort of Christian teachings who are just as moral as I am. One would have to think that if they aren't Christian, then when and how did they learn about morality? Like I said, I do agree with Dennis Prager on quite a few subjects, but he's really stretching it with this argument. Christianity is multi-layered in that it does have strong moral teachings within the religion, but to incite that Christianity is the only way to teach morality is just flat out wrong. By YouTube user Tukenbird. Murder most fair. Part 5. Playing Devil's Advocate. What if alt-hist, aka Rudy Lynch, has done a better job than literally anyone else when it comes to convincing me that religion can be beneficial or possibly even necessary for society, and more specifically made me take another look at Christianity. It does help that Lynch is a Quaker instead of some internet reactionary a Christian right-winger who's a Christian just to be contrarian to atheist left-wingers, as talked about in Religious LARPers Are Ruining the Internet, and Here's How. Also, some of my favorite people in politics are Christians, such as Ron Paul, Tom Woods, a Catholic, Thomas Sowell, and Anomaly. Another thing I do agree with Christian right-wingers on is to have a moral basis outside the state, even though obviously our values and, by extension, end goals are very different. I can understand that philosophy may work for certain personality types, but not others, in which religion may work better. Religions appeal to the masses and philosophy is to administrators. Those are strong centralized governments like the Roman or Chinese empires, where those of philosophies like Stoicism, Epicureanism, Confucianism, or legalism, while those of weak centralized governments like the Middle Ages, or most of Indian history had Christianity, Islam, and Hinduism, the four trends of the 21st century by What If Atheists. Part 4. Purity. This is based on the 6 most extreme societies ever. We're one. The main weakness we see in Wahhabism, and we see this has manifested in every purity-based form, is that they obsessively strive for purity, so lose mental and strategic flexibility, and throw the ability to make alliances out the window. For example, the Crusaders could have gotten more allies, such as the Byzantines and the Emirate of Damascus, if they accepted non-Catholics. If the German National Socialists compromised on their racial views, they could have gotten most of Eastern Europe on their side against the Soviets during World War II, and modern-day Wahhabis could have formed alliances with other Muslims if they were more moderate. A similar point, I think, was made by David Cole Stein in his article, Masturbating Conservatives. I'm a Christian and I agree and disagree with Prager and Killian on various subject matters. When it comes to morality, I do think Dennis Prager is stretching quite a bit with this one. Can being a Christian make you a moral person? Yes. There are principles in Christianity that make you a moral person. However, all you have to do is look at humanity as a whole to realize that you don't have to be Christian to be a moral person. If what Dennis said is true, you would see atheists out there murdering and raping. I know people who aren't Christian and nor who grew up with any sort of Christian teachings who are just as moral as I am. One would have to think that if they aren't Christian, then when and how did they learn about morality? Like I said, I do agree with Dennis Prager on quite a few subjects, but he's really stretching it with this argument. Christianity is multi-layered in that it does have strong moral teachings within the religion, but to incite that Christianity is the only way to teach morality is just flat out wrong. By YouTube user Tukenberg. Murder most fair. Part 5. Playing Devil's Advocate. What if alt-hist, aka Rudyard Lynch, has done a better job than literally anyone else when it comes to convincing me that religion can be beneficial or possibly even necessary for society, and more specifically made me take another look at Christianity? It does help that Lynch is a Quaker instead of some internet reactionary, he Christian right-winger who's a Christian just to be contrarian to atheist left-wingers, as talked about in Religious LARPers Are Ruining the Internet, and Here's How. Also, some of my favorite people in politics are Christians, such as Ron Paul, Tom Woods, a Catholic, Thomas Sowell, and Anomaly. Another thing I do agree with Christian right-wingers on is to have a moral basis outside the state, even though obviously our values and, by extension, end goals are very different. I can understand that philosophy may work for certain personality types, but not others, in which religion may work better. Religions appeal to the masses, and philosophy is to administrators. Those are strong centralized governments like the Roman or Chinese empires, where those of philosophies like Stoicism, Epicureanism, Confucianism, or legalism, while those of weak centralized governments like the Middle Ages, or most of Indian history, had Christianity, Islam, and Hinduism, the four trends of the 21st century by What If Atheists. Part 4. Purity. This is based on the 6 most extreme societies ever. We're one. The main weakness we see in Wahhabism, and we see this has manifested in every purity-based form, is that they obsessively strive for purity, so lose mental and strategic flexibility, and throw the ability to make alliances out the window. For example, the Crusaders could have gotten more allies, such as the Byzantines and the Emirate of Damascus, if they accepted non-Catholics. If the German National Socialists compromised on their racial views, they could have gotten most of Eastern Europe on their side against the Soviets during World War II, and modern-day Wahhabis could have formed alliances with other Muslims if they were more moderate. A similar point, I think, was made by David Cole Stein in his article, Masturbating Conservatives. As someone who grows up in a secular society with such technological advancement as we have, it is understandable to not have as much incentive towards religion. I personally was an atheist for many years. I was raised Catholic, but was inundated in the culture of the internet, and was convinced by a large amount of atheist content online. It ultimately came down to a low self-esteem and belief on my part. By clinging to rationality and rejecting anything that I could not see empirically, it gave me a sense of superiority over the irrational groups. I could at least point to my rationality as a positive quality I had over others. Of course, in reality, humanity is not rational in the slightest. My own will to be rational was not based on rational reasons. If you have read Thinking Fast and Slow and/or The Righteous Mind, modern psychology understands that humans have instincts and use rationality to rationalize their decisions and instincts after the fact. Not to say that your atheism is founded on such weak foundations as mine was. Religion offers help to those living in a painful reality. Our struggles are not in vain. There's a purpose to our existence, and we have a goal to strive towards, which is greater than ourselves. Religion offers a community in a society which is quickly atomizing, depression skyrocketing. Religious societies in the past, despite much worse material conditions than today, were objectively happier people. People got married and had children, and continued their traditions as part of a community. Atheist society today has no children, no identity, no community, massive depression rates, marriage rates plummeting, single motherhood, addictions to substances, addiction to porn. The sexual revolution led to the least amount of sex occurring. The dating market is terrible. People don't get married, and if they do, the divorce rate is high. People report massive loneliness and unhappiness. That's the fruits of your atheist society. If you can have all of these things fulfilled in your life without religion, then good for you. Naturally, this is just the benefits I can explain to a materialist living in this world. Humanity, for its entire existence, has had a spiritual side which has always been fulfilled by religion. To ignore this is to deny the history of humanity. Sure, perhaps you personally have no need for spirituality, but the vast majority of humanity does. This is a fact. Humanity cannot become enlightened out of a need for spirituality, just as it cannot be enlightened out of a need for food. Ultimately, the benefits of religion, both spiritual and psychological, is just a rational reason to believe in one. The ideal reason is to serve the will of our Creator. It just happens that serving the will of our Creator is highly beneficial to us in this life, ignoring any potential afterlife. Hedonism has a proven track record of creating less happy people than listening to the wisdom of our ancestors for thousands of years who knew how to have a happy, fulfilled life. To assume everyone through history he was just a simple idiot and you are the height of human intelligence is an unfortunately common stance in our modern age. Complete hubris. By YouTube user William Marshall. Why Modern Dating is Broken.
Number 7. Are modern religions what their prophets preached? I was once reading a book on the history of India, and one of the interesting things the author said was that Mahayana Buddhism, or Buddhism in East Asia, basically turned out to be the opposite of what Buddha taught in a lot of ways. Buddha stood against creeds, gods, worshipping him as a god, believing in devils and spirits, making theories that cosmology are working with the state. Can you guess what Mahayana Buddhism did? Every single one of those. I thought about that for a second, and it reminds me of another book I read called Misreading Scripture Through Western Eyes, and it talked about how we misinterpret the Bible through a totally different lens than how the people who were at the time wrote it. For example, when the Bible talks about modesty, they don't mean sexual modesty. Nudity was considered low class at the time and no woman would want to be nude, but rather not wearing a lot of expensive clothes, or how due to the cultural assumptions involved, a lot of the biblical statements are meant to be general guidelines rather than hard rules and facts. Or Sodom and Gomorrah probably had more to do with rape than homosexuality. It's ironic how Bible Belt Americans are so hard on things like abortion or sexual mores, both of which have kind of weird positions in the Bible, but ignore or support things that Jesus was actively against. I mean, Jesus wasn't too happy with usury or basically debt-paying loans to dominate the American economy, and I'm not sure the Pax Americana or bombing dozens of countries really fits in with love thy neighbor and turn the other cheek. In many ways, Western Christianity, influenced by its own civilization for thousands of years, is as removed from its prophet as Mahayana Buddhism is from Buddha. Inconsistencies like this are easy to find in every single religion or part of the human condition. People like pointing out, for example, how radical Muslims tend to violate the tenets of their own faith in an attempt to follow it so purely. And this is the case for every single ideology, where once it has to deal with the real world, it ends up being changed by the real world. And people use the ideology for their own greed and all that stuff, with a great example being Keynesian economics, which modern quote-unquote Keynesians push the exact opposite of what Keynes wanted, where Keynes said, save in the good times, spend in the bad times. Modern Keynesians spend all the time. This doesn't even get down to how much was lost in translation from these figures living thousands of years ago. There were so many battles among early Christians, for example, in the centuries after Christ about how things would get codified. Soon after the resurrection, Jesus' brother James wanted to keep Christianity as a sect of Judaism, but then St. Paul won out and made Christianity for the Gentiles. After that, you saw a variety of sects like the Gnostics, Arians, Montanists, Nestorians, and the like, that I don't really see being any less closely related to the Bible and Jesus than the Catholics that won out. The Catholic Church then edited what Christian texts became canon. This doesn't even get down to comparing what prophets were trying to say with how it was immediately interpreted by their societies. Take figures in extremely recent history like Nietzsche or Karl Marx. People will argue all day what Nietzsche was trying to say, and Karl Marx has been misinterpreted 1,000 times over. The problem with geniuses is that they often construct extremely complicated, and from the perspective of less intelligent people, seemingly contradictory worldviews, but that's just a reflection of how often complicated and contradictory the real world is. What normally happens is that a genius creates a very complicated and coherent view of the world, and then since that worldview is so complicated, people afterwards can cherry pick different quotes for whatever they want to do. How do we deal with that? I'm sure many of the faithful are mortified to imagine that they aren't purposely following the will of God as explicitly stated by their prophet. However, I think it's fine to chill. The whole point of Christianity is that we're all impure, but through God's love we're able to transcend that impurity, and I always start my own views of Christianity with the assumption that God is loving and forgiving, and if you're trying your best, He'll accept that. Jesus himself spoke against the Pharisees, or those in his time who obsessed over rules, rather than standing for the general message of loving God. For the examples of Western Christianity and Mahayana Buddhism, both of these have done beautiful and moral things that warrant pride just by themselves. Also, remember that the world has changed a lot. Ending slavery isn't directly in the Bible, but is definitely in the spirit of things, and I'm glad European Christendom did it. Zen Buddhism, very little relation to what Buddha taught, but Zen Buddhism is a totally independent outgrowth of Mahayana Buddhism that's very different from how Buddha probably imagined it, but Zen is one of the most beautiful things ever made. Also, remember that the world has changed a lot. Even if you start the assumption that Jesus was the Son of God, he still had to tailor his divine advice to the world 2,000 years ago, and there's no way he could say enough in the 33 years of his life to convey every exigency of all the future. I guess I'm a bit biased since I was raised a Quaker, a sect of Protestantism that believes in continuous revelation, or that God speaks to us all. Strangely enough, one of the first things I think of in this whole thing is how the white and literal fraudster Black Lives Matter activist leader, Shaun King, hates on white Jesus, saying Jesus was dark-skinned, which is insane considering Jesus was a Jew, and Jews look like this. However, my take is that Africans make black Jesuses, Koreans make Asian Jesuses, and the like, and since the Christian message applies to all peoples, so it makes sense if North Europeans make Jesus in their image. It makes me thinking about how missionaries in the Arctic talk to Eskimos about the seal of God rather than the Lamb of God, since it's get across the vibe of God's universality. God belongs to all of us, not purely to the inhabitants of the Syrian desert from 3,000 to 2,000 years ago. What if Altist, and thanks for watching. If you enjoyed that video...
5. Bonus. Some quotes from America's founding fathers. Maybe you're a radical because you're lonely. Is loneliness fueling the rise of political polarization in the U.S.? Clearly, people on both sides of the political spectrum are scared, each thinking that the other is a threat to their very way of life. Yet, what feels each party feels some threat from the other side. Does American fear stem from something deeper than political leaders? Hannah Arendt, an American-German philosopher, spent time tracing the demise of a nation into totalitarianism in her book, The Origins of Totalitarianism. What I find most fascinating in this book is the connection she draws between loneliness and fear. Loneliness, she argues, has serious consequences. What makes loneliness so unbearable is the loss of one's own self, which can be realized in solitude, but confirmed in its identity only by the trusting and trustworthy company of my equals. In this situation, man loses trust in himself as the partner of his thoughts and that elementary confidence in the world, which is necessary to make experience his at all. Self and world, capacity for thought and experience are lost at the same time. In other words, loneliness is harmful to individuals, not because it's merely unpleasant, but because it leads to a loss of self-identity, and consequently, a real view of the world. Furthermore, if a person does not have some idea of who they are, they will not be able to make sense of the world around them and will ultimately become confused, fearful, and unable to function. So they must choose something to identify themselves with if they want to make sense of the world at all and attain some level of inner security. With depression rates rising and nearly half of Americans feeling alone, it's clear that an epidemic of loneliness is upon us. Could this loneliness have the same effect on America that Arendt had suggested, namely the loss of self and world? This seems possible. Many individuals no longer have the communal and social connections they once had, such as religion, ethnic culture, and family. The only connection many have left is their political party, and that forms their identity. And because of the closeness this has to their identity, they become more tribal and defensive when the party is attacked. Today, we see a great fear between the opposing political parties. Does this fear simply come from the actions of both parties? Or is there greater loneliness and loss of personal identity at play? I have a couple last things to say. One, from a video from a Christian nationalist I watched, their reason for supporting socially conservative policies from obscenity/pornography bans to bans on homosexual marriage to presumably mandatory prayer in presumably government schools sounds like vindictiveness to me, giving me the feeling of since you broke my toys, I'll break your toys, as that individual's support for Christian nationalism is mainly driven by their hate for leftists, or at least social justice. Also, I believe that the height of arrogance is to believe that God is on your side. Part 6, Additional Resources. Content Creators. Freedom Alternative. Ryan Dawson. 6X and Hammer 666. Dark Matter 2525. Tom Woods. Dave Smith. Waterfall Hist. And Short Fat Otaku. Groups. Atheists for Liberty. Republican Atheists. Registered Republicans. Mises Institute. Anti-abortion groups and websites, secular pro-life, secular humanists, atheist agnostic pro-life league. The list of people address as Groypers, Nick Fuentes, Vincent James, Michelle Malkin, Stu Peters, Wayne Dupree, non-Groypers, Jay Dyer, Michael Nolis, Vince Dow, Carson Wolf, ambiguous if he's a Groyper, John Doyle, Marcel Z, Pat Buchanan, E. Michael Jones, Rocking Mr. E, Dr. Steve Turley, Bill Still, Milo Yiannopoulos, Mental Outlaw, aka Kenny, government officials, hosted by the American First Political Action Conference, and or have an agenda similar to the Groypers, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Paul Gosar, Wendy Rogers, Janice McGritchen, Steve King, Paul Gosar, Laura Loomer, Janice McGritchen. Populists. Not all may be Christian nationalists or fundamentalists per se, but many certainly do have a very high opinion of Christianity. Joe Kent, Blake Masters, Doug Mastriano, Anthony Sabatini, Matt Walsh, Will Witt, Bryson Gray. I ask that no one else contact Jay Dyer, Carson Wolf, or Vince Dow, as I prefer to contact them myself, considering how they seem to be reachable, small content creators. Now, for you atheist left-wingers, you have to read. I'm going to make a video for you guys, or at least read this article. Thank you for listening. Here's my social media link tree, which I ask that you keep archive. You keep the link and archive my content, and please, to make sure that YouTube, Google does not monetize this video.
Listen, you son of a bitch. What the fuck's your problem? You want to sit here and say that I'm a goddamn fucking Russian? You get in my face with that, I'll beat your goddamn ass, you son of a bitch. You piece of shit. You fucking goddamn fucker. Listen, fuckhead, you have fucking crossed a line. Get that through your goddamn fucking head. Stop pushing your shit. You're the people that have fucked this country over and gang raped the shit out of it and lost an election. So stop shooting your mouth off claiming I'm the enemy. You got that, you goddamn son of a bitch? Fill your hand. I'm sorry, but I'm done. You start calling me a foreign agent, those are fucking fighting words. Excuse me.
Because as Google does not believe in free speech, along with its ties to BlackRock and Oracle. Oracle collects Oracle data mines info on billions of people, and BlackRock is crushing small businesses. Is to try to create a monopoly for itself.
I don't want to give if Google ad revenue